Hi, and welcome to Table Talks on Today with Paul. Today, I'm happy to share with you another one of my favorite movies I've had in the last few years. It's a little something called Jeff Who Lives at Home. And this just so happens to star Jason Segel, Ed Helms, Susan Sarandon, and Judy Greer, and of course, Ray Dong Chong. Ray Don Chong, sorry. This was a copyright date of 2012, and of course, Jason Segel just so happens to be a favorite of mine from back in the what was that show, Freaks and Geeks, back in the day, and of course, that produced a lot of stars from my actual age range. To tell the truth, my generation, my age range. You got James Franco and the gang from back in those days. But anyways, you got this movie, starts out kind of slow with Jeff who lives at home. Yeah, go figure. And also my buddy Arnold Palmer is here to join me today. If I could talk right, how about that? A little half tea, half lemonade mix there. I love that. I actually do have my little cheat card here today because as much as I like this movie, there's, I didn't remember everybody in it as far as the stars went, especially Judy Greer. She's in a lot of things, but unfortunately she's not as well known as some. But the movie starts out with Jason Segel as Jeff, and he just so happens to be at home, and he's a pothead, and his mom, Susan Sarandon's been getting on him about fixing this nice little wood shade on a pantry door with some get him to go down to the hardware store and get some wood glue. So he gets a phone call early in the day one day after he wakes and bakes, and some guy asking for Kevin, and he's really pissed off that every time he calls for Kevin wherever he's calling to, he never gets him. So you see at the start of the movie, the Jason Segel's character is actually really into this whole idea of signs out there, reading the signs in what I call the river. And in fact, in particular, he focuses on the movie Signs by Mel Gibson. I know I'm dancing around this subject a lot today. There's a lot of stuff here. And of course, any of you have seen the movie Signs, with Joaquin Phoenix and Mel Gibson, you know that the little girl the whole way keeps leaving cups of water around. Well, it turns out that aliens invade, and they don't do so well with water, so they start tossing the cups of water on them at the end. So Jeff decides that based on this movie, that there's signs out there, that things happen for a reason. And of course, I call that the river, like I said. So the guy calls up, he's mad about Kevin. So he starts looking at Kevin, he starts taking the name apart and trying to rearrange the letters and try to find some meaning in it. And all of a sudden his mom calls him up about getting the wood glue. So he finally gets his slacker butt up and decides to go hit the bus and go down to the hardware store and grab that wood glue. Well, wouldn't you know it, he just so happens to be on said bus, and all of a sudden he sees the back of a young man's basketball jersey, and it says Kevin on it. So Jeff decides to follow this kid. I said kid, but he's probably 17 or 18, looks wise. And he goes to the basketball court. Just so happens Jeff tries to be sneaky and pulls a ding-ding after Kevin gets off just a little ways down the road. And he follows him to the basketball court. Well, this guy, he kind of recognizes him. He feels like he's been followed a little bit. But all of a sudden, somebody gets injured on the basketball court. Tasty. And then it turns out that they need an extra player. So all of a sudden, Jeff is the only one sitting around, and so I guess we'll have to take him. And so they do, and he's playing and all that. And afterwards, this guy with the Kevin jersey on says, "Hey man, you want to throw something up in the wind?" And he goes around the corner and with him, and he's like, I don't know what you mean by that. And Kevin goes, smoke a little, And so Jeff's like, yeah, sure, that's great. Of course, he's a pothead, so gonna do that. As soon as they toke up in an abandoned little building, Kevin's kind of like, I hate to see this bad things that happen to good people. All of a sudden, some of his friends come around and they beat the heck out of Jeff. And wouldn't you know it, he's left without the money for the wood glue or even money for the bus. So he starts hoofing it. And then all of a sudden, this is where his brother comes into play, played by Ed Helms. Can't talk today for some reason. Tasty. And so Ed Helms plays Pat, his brother, Jeff's brother. And all of a sudden, he's at this business meeting where he's at like a Hooter style restaurant. And all of a sudden, he's leaving. And Jeff just happens to be walking by. And so he gives him a ride in his new Porsche, which his wife is not happy about. She's really upset about that. I mean, he tried to butter her up with the pancake breakfast and everything that morning. And like, oh yeah, the lease, he just couldn't beat the lease. The lease is amazing on this and it's gonna help my business so much. And he's trying to play like a big shot even though he's not. And so she takes the whole fridge, he takes all the condiments and pours mustard and ketchup and all that all over it, just squeezes the stuff over there from their top porch. But anyways, he's there at the restaurant trying to dress to impress a client, if you will, and then his brother's coming by, gives him a ride. And of course, he's had a couple beverages by then. So Pat's just driving and he's like trying to impress his brother, like, look what this cool sports car can do. He's weaving in and out of traffic. Well, all of a sudden, traffic stops and he has to swerve off the road. And he actually runs right into a tree. And this old couple's living there, and they're all about calling the cops. Well, of course, Pat's been drinking, so last thing he wants is a DUI. So he tries to fix it. Can we just, fix this with like a little bit of money under the table? They say, how about $500? And he's like, how about 100? And he said, okay, go ahead, call the cops. So finally they work their way until he ends up paying $500 to keep it hush hush because he kind of messed her tree up quite a bit. So then what happens is you've got this beat up sports car. They're driving around and all of a sudden they're passing by a gas station. And Jeff says, hey, isn't that your wife, Linda? And she's over at the gas station. Here's this dude, turns out to be named Steve, who's with her, a coworker of hers. And just wouldn't you know it, they start suspecting that they're like, what's she doing? I think she's fooling around a little bit. So, of course, Ed Helms is all upset. And he basically decides they're gonna follow them around, see what's going on. They end up at a fancy restaurant, and he sends his brother in to get a booth right next to theirs. And here's Pat across the street at a payphone, calling his brother on his cell phone, Pat's cell phone, mind you, because Jeff doesn't have one. And he trying to listen in on his wife's conversation with Steve. And of course, as luck would have it, it sure looks like what's going on is going on. And Jeff has no money to pay for anything at the restaurant. The waiter keeps bothering him. But finally, Linda and Steve get up. And of course, as you would figure, he gets figured out. And all the while, Pat's car, his wrecked Porsche with a messed up front end, is being towed because he parks in front of a fire hydrant or something like that. So now all of a sudden he's riding down the street after his car, and Jeff's wondering about his brother. No, chase him down, and finally Pat gives up on running, and it's like, hey, what do you got? Any brilliant ideas now? You see the world so messed up, Jeff. And I can't believe you believe all that mumbo jumbo about things happen for a reason and all that. Well, what was the reason for that? And so finally Jeff sees a truck that says Kevin's Candies. It just so happens to be one of those vending machine trucks. And Pat's like, oh sure, just go ahead and jump on a truck because it says Kevin on it. Oh yeah, I bet. What of you? So he goes ahead and jumps on. It's like, I know you don't believe it, Pat, but everything happens for a reason. I'm following the signs, and he jumps on the truck. And Pat somehow follows his wife and Steve to a hotel. Finds out they're got a room at a hotel. Well, he's very striking out with the front cashier at the hotel, and you know, he even tells him after he tries to slip him a 20 spot for the a key to the room, quit embarrassing yourself, sir. And he leaves. Just so happens at the same time, Kevin's Candies is rolling up to the same hotel, service the candy machine. And all of a sudden, wouldn't you know it, reunion between Pat and Jeff. And Pat's starting to become a little bit of a believer now. And he's like, I gotta trust my brother on this one, right? And they end up in the hotel. Just so happens old Steve is coming out for ice as they're hiding behind a vending machine. And then so they are able to follow him to the room where him and Linda are going to be at. And they're outside the door debating on strategy. And Pat's really relying on Jeff. And all of a sudden, you know, Pat decides he's just gonna pound on that door. They're gonna try to break the door down. Jeff volunteers to be the one to shoulder it, and nothing. That door is rock solid, but of course, they're all attention is worn in on the inside. So there you go. Nice little shouting match between Linda and Pat while Steve's told to just go home. And, you know, that's how it goes with that one while Jeff's on standby, just to kind of whatever. Oh, tasty. Oh, I really love these Arnold Palmers. Meanwhile, Mom's at the office, and she keeps getting emails from somebody about actually being interested in her, and she keeps looking at all the guys. Well, long story short on that one, actually ends up to be a woman. Yeah. Unexpectedly to her, ends up being a woman, and that just so happens to be Carol, played by Ray Dawn Chong. And eventually it gets to the point where Carol goes ahead and pulls the fire alarm after Sharon, played by Susan Sarandon, has kind of declined her advances. But Carol's just like, hey, you know, why does it have to be a man or a woman or whatever? Just somebody who you actually share interest with, who you really enjoy spending time with. So she pulls the fire alarm finally, and Sharon goes along with her, and they're gonna just run away. And they're like, hey, let's go. Where do you want to go? Anywhere you want, Sharon. And she says, well, Carol, how about we go down to the bar or something? She says, think bigger, think bigger. And so Sharon says, well, how about New Orleans? I haven't been to New Orleans in years. She's like, yeah, that's the ticket. That's what I'm talking about. So they just jet off while he's waiting outside the office and start getting on the highway. Well, the whole hotel scene kind of broke down, and Jeff and Pat are still at the hotel, just kind of sitting there in that room while Linda left. And everything, and they're discussing strategy, and, Jeff says, it's like, you just need to, what should I, well, actually, Pat says to Jeff, what should I do? And he says, well, I don't know, man. It's not like there's just a real trick to this, you follow the signs, but there's not a real trick to it. And so I don't know. I mean, it's just whatever you feel needs to have to be done. And he says, I just wish I could tell her that I just want to be in love with her again. And he says, that's it, Pat. That's what you need to do. You need to go tell her that. And he's kind of going, no, that's just silly. That's ridiculous. And Jeff's like, well, how stoked would you be if she just broke in here right now and said the same thing to you? He said, Pat's like, I'd be super stoked. I'd be excited. I would be super happy. Jeff said, yeah. So just imagine how happy she would be. So they end up getting a taxi, get on the highway. Same highway Mom and Carol are on as well. And just so it happens, Linda's a little ways up, and traffic is at a deadlock all of a sudden for some reason. And Pat's just like going crazy in the brain, does not know what to do at all. And of course he's looking at Jeff now, because Jeff's just the one living this whole following the signs, the river as I call it. and he's just getting used to the fact that he's just got to do what feels right. So finally, he gets out of the car and just goes sprinting down the highway with deadlocked traffic right in between the lanes. And finally, he finds Linda, and he says what he has to say. Everything looks like it's cool. And of course, Sharon and Carol seeing Pat running past them as well, and so Sharon's kind of freaked out, like, what's my son running down the highway for? So you got this. Everybody ends up reuniting, and Jeff's sitting in the car in the taxi all by himself, and he's wanting to go back now all of a sudden. And the taxi driver says, "Well, good luck in all this. It's going to be quite some time." He looks out the window, and he can't but notice some commotion over the side of the bridge. And by the way, the highway's a bridge, and there's a big body of water below it. He notices like some helicopters coming by, that sort of thing. He gets out of the car to look and see, and it looks like there's a car that's just bobbing in the water. It's about to go under. So he sprints down the highway till all of a sudden he sees the scene firsthand. He's right there. And every fiber of his being, as soon as he gets there, he doesn't even hesitate. He jumps up to the ledge of the bridge and just jumps in the water. And he dives underneath, and his family's there on the highway, and they have to run over and see what the heck's going on, because why did Jeff just jump in the water? Well, it turned out to be a family of a dad and two daughters in the water that day. I believe it was two daughters. And real emotional scene where Jeff's family's really scared for him, and all of a sudden he pops up with two little girls, and this boat's coming by, and he puts them in the boat. But he realizes, and they're like, my daddy, my daddy, my daddy. So Jeff, he swims back, and the car's just starting to go under. I mean, the last bubbles are popping up through the water, and he dives again. And all of a sudden, not long after, you see somebody emerge. And I don't know. I mean, at least for me, I was hoping it was Jeff, I guess. Or at least I'd see somebody else pop up not long after. Well, it turns out to be Dad. And so it starts to look like they stalled out for just long enough. It looks like Jeff basically gave his life for the father. Well, it turns out Ed Helms jumps in also, and not long after, Jeff emerges, but he is taking on quite a bit of water. And in the emergency boats, they get him to spitting up the water and everything, and Jeff's all right. Next day, you see on the news that the kids and the dad are safe, and everybody's real happy about that. At the end of the film, Jeff realizes that he served a purpose. As much as he wanted to find purpose in life, he served purpose that day for sure. He saved some lives, and goes back to just as simple as that one purpose has him moving forward just one little inch. And so he finally glues up the wood piece on the shutter on the pantry door, which was a big step for Mr. Stoner, who started out the movie like that, without even being able to get down to the hardware store. And there the movie ends. So anyways, Jeff Who Lives at Home. I believe it's a really great movie about the river, about the seeing the signs as you go. I like to say I see God speaking to me every day. I see it every day in these little things, and I think this is a good inspirational example of what that can look like. It's just small things. It's not too big of a deal. But I want to thank you for sharing, liking, and subscribing as always. And of course, hope to catch you next time. Peace.